I want to share a story with you guys today. It's a story about my little brother Rufus, and it starts a couple of years ago in Auckland on a bus. Rufus is my third brother. I've actually got four brothers. He's 22, he lives in Kaikoura, where I'm from, and he's a real character, so we're actually pretty close. He also has Down syndrome, and so I've grown up, I suppose, in very close contact with this person who very much views the world in his own way. People sometimes ask me what it's like growing up with a sibling with Down syndrome, how it's changed me. And it's a really hard one to answer, and usually I kind of end up jumping over the question. But I suppose when I do think about it specifically, one feeling that I come back to is the feeling of being at a point of crossroads. And I think that's because in my interactions with Rufus, so often it's instinctual for me to want to impose my own worldview on him and to kind of help him to navigate the world in the way that makes sense to me. But time and time again, I end up at the same kind of point in the road wondering, am I right in doing things this way? Is this something that Rufus has to learn, or is this something that I have to learn? As I said, Rufus is one of 5 siblings, and always our kind of general attitude to him has been like, keep up, We're definitely one of those kind of loud, chaotic families that talk over each other at dinner, and I think Rufus learned pretty quick that it was join in or miss out. We don't particularly give him like special treatment. I remember once we were going to a cafe and Rufus was annoying everyone, and Mum ended up shouting, "Is there something wrong with you?" across the table at him, much to the horror of all the other cafe goers. So yeah, as a result, he's pretty hard case, and he definitely gives it back to us. And he also, he absolutely loves me writing and talking about him. So since my book, which actually features Rufus a lot, he spends his life telling me, I am famous now. And actually recently I had an interview with Radio New Zealand, and afterwards I was back at a hotel that afternoon with Rufus, and we played it back over, and at the end he was like, "Was that it?" Because I hadn't mentioned him at all. So I'm making up for that now. But yeah, I guess I write and talk about Rufus a lot, and I think in many ways I'm kind of trying to untangle the deep significance that he's had on my life. I think my family and I are absolutely unified that he's kind of essential to our lives and to who we are as people. And in a world that's statistically less and less willing to carry Downs babies to term, I think I'm kind of always trying to unravel what that means to me. So back to the bus, kind of where the story starts. Rufus has a lot of passions in life, and one of his most enduring is for Shortland Street, which, as I'm sure you know, is a New Zealand soap opera about the staff of an Auckland hospital. It's Rufus's favourite drama, and I think we can all agree it's New Zealand's favourite drama. It's an absolute emotional roller coaster of murder, love triangles, drug scandals, one particularly confronting episode, a Harry Warner dick pic. So Rufus is there for every single night without fail. So this bus ride that we're on is actually a pretty big deal because we were on our way to the Shortland Street studios for a tour. I'd kind of organised it for Rufus as a trip away for us because we're from the South Islands. We'd flown up, stayed in a hotel, and Shortland Street, kind of upon reading my email outlining the depths of Rufus's appreciation for the show, had actually been super cool about it and kind of invited us to come and hang out for the afternoon while they filmed. So just before we arrived at the studios, I was like, okay, Rufus, we're going to have a quick chat. I wanted to remind you that Shortland Street, while being an incredible show, is not real. I was like, it's like acting, it's like a school play. And he's like, I know. And I was like, oh, I don't know if you do know, because I know Rufus pretty well. And this is like a prime example of how he kind of navigates the world differently. It's not that he thinks it's real necessarily. It's just that like Shortland Street is just Shortland Street. It's just there on the TV every night. There's really no need to question it any further than that. So I guess here's where you come to a classic kind of moment of crossroads, because in that moment it was pretty clear to me that I was just going to have to sort of let go of my desire to explain and kind of just go with it. And right then Rufus turned to me and he's like, well, if I see Lucy, Lucy being a character on the show who at that time was not in Rufus's good books, and then he went, so that was really comforting for me. But we arrive at the studio and we basically go to meet the woman who's going to go show us around, and And Rufus is like so pumped up at this point, having just seen the Shortland Street sign outside, that he like can't really form words. And so the lady's talking so slow and loud to him, which was also really amusing for me. But first up we go to the set. So basically the set is like a series of, fold out walls that you can open and close depending on what room you're using to film in. And Ruth immediately recognises one of the rooms, and he's like, this is Boyd's room, and then he like flings open the door, which just leads to nothing. And he's like, random, and shuts the door. And so next up we're heading to the IV bar, which is the kind of bar of the show, and it's all set up like it is on the show. And Rufus just picks up a bottle of spirits from the bench, like tips it upside down, and he's like, fake alcohol, random. And then we go on to meet the characters, and so first out comes, Lucy, who's the one that Rufus would often yell at from the TV at home. But actually, as it happens, Lucy went to my high school in Christchurch, so she kind of vaguely knows me and knows Rufus. So she comes up like, Rufus, how are you? Like, big hug. And Rufus just kind of gives me this shocked look over her shoulder, and then like later whispers like, she's not that bad. And then next out comes Nicole. So Nicole, at the time Rufus is watching, Nicole is not pregnant, but now that they're filming the show 3 months in advance, so she now has like a pregnant belly. And Rufus is like, Nicole, like, you're pregnant. And she's like, yeah, Ruf, look, like a fake baby, And Rufus is just like, a fake baby, random. And I was like, yeah, to be honest, that is pretty random. But anyway, so we kind of wrap up at the studios, and like at this point, we've like seen all the actors, we've watched them filming, seen the set. Rufus has like a signed poster with his name all over it. And we're like, wave goodbye, and we're walking down the street, down towards the bus, and Rufus, at that moment, like an actual kind of real life ambulance drives past with its sirens wailing, and Rufus just turns to me and he's like, that'll be Dallas. Yeah. So it's funny, because even though this was kind of such a standout day, because we were at Shortland Street, in a sense, like, it was actually so unremarkable, because that is just what hanging out with Rufus is like. For him, so much of his life is about coming up against things that don't make sense, which are different, which he can't immediately get. And I'm genuinely of the opinion that all our lives are like that a lot of the time. And Rufus is the absolute best at kind of coming up to something new and strange, and in that moment of decision, kind of being able to totally let go of a need to make the right choice. When I first got up here today, I talked about how being with Rufus kind of puts me at a point of crossroads. He makes me ask myself if the way that makes sense to me is actually the right way, or the only way, or the best way. And I think that's something really valuable he's given me, because kind of now I know how often I'm wrong, or rather how neither of us is wrong or right. It's all well and good to talk about how diversity is good for us. I think all of us in this room would logically say that they know it's important to value all different kinds of ideas and approaches and opinions and ways of doing things. But I think that as a society, we still like to pick and choose what kind of diversity we celebrate. In 2016, I read an article on the spin-off called Are We Sleepwalking into a World Without Down Syndrome? So the article kind of talked about the pretty harsh reality that we're facing as a kind of global community, which is that in countries where sophisticated tests make it easier and safer to diagnose early, dramatically less and less babies are being born with Down syndrome. So in New Zealand, 2/3 of babies diagnosed with Down syndrome in utero are terminated. In Iceland, 100% of Down syndrome pregnancies are terminated. So there's two really important things that I want to acknowledge at this point. The first is that I am deeply pro-choice. I believe wholeheartedly in a woman's right to choose what's best for her. The second thing that I want to acknowledge is privilege. It was one thing for my Pakeha middle-class parents to drive Rufus 3 hours to a city centre where he could attend support groups or camps, and they were in a financial position where they could cover the cost of a teacher aide for the many, many hours of schooling that the government funding wouldn't cover, because there is still nowhere near enough support out there for parents with kids with Down syndrome. And actually outside of city centres, that support decreases dramatically. So I'm absolutely not casting judgment on anyone who feels that they don't have the resources or the capabilities to take care of a disabled child. But I also think, it's really important not to cast judgment on anyone who's made the opposite decision. And I know this happens because my family's been on the receiving end of it. To me, the idea that kids with Down syndrome are a burden on their families or a burden on their communities, rather than just being kind of another intricate part of the great spectrum of human life, that's really flawed. And I think when we think about human capabilities, we tend to assume that anything outside normal is bad, and that's a really easy assumption to make when you haven't had Rufus in your life. But I have, and in my mind, a world without Down syndrome is absolutely not a world we should be striving for. To see difference as a literal tax, or to see disability as like a constant struggle, I think that's a really dangerous misunderstanding that's actually going to kind of ultimately hold us back from being a much better, stronger, kinder, more empathetic society. When people talk to me about Down syndrome, often it's kind of along the lines of, oh, they're so positive, they're so loving, and that's absolutely true. But it's so much deeper than that. Rufus, like me, experiences a full range of human emotions. He gets mad, he gets upset, he feels hurt, he feels injustice. But what he also has is a total ability to cut to the heart of things, while I'm kind of caught up worrying about what people think of me, which seems like such a petty thing, but I think about it all the time. Or if my behaviour is appropriate, Rufus would have just already gone ahead and hugged the person that's upset, because to him that's simple. I didn't know all this in the beginning. When my parents met Rufus for the first time, they were frightened. They were frightened for him, for what his life would be like, frightened for our family, frightened for me that my life was going to be that much harder. And I guess on that, I kind of wanted to read you guys something from my book, which I brought with me. So this is this is from a chapter called Kids. And it's about the kind of strange, confusing, sad time that my parents went through when Rufus was born. He was a stranger to us, floppy and quiet. My parents didn't know if they could still call him Rufus. He wasn't that boy, the one they had spent so many nights imagining, but he was ours. Eventually, Mum and Dad brought him home from the hospital, terrified all over again. Why are you crying, we asked them, peering at the baby, waiting to see what was so upsetting. He wore our hand-me-down clothes and slept in the baby hammock suspended in the kitchen, same as we all did. He would fall asleep next to Finn on the living room floor, their faces together, their arms intertwined. If only you'd known, whispered well-meaning friends with pained expressions. Known what, my mother asked later in the refuge of her bedroom, stubborn and tearful. What would I have done? It stirred something in her, an anger, pushing at the floodgates until love poured out. Rufus, she sang to him, Rufus. In Wellington, my flatmate has a brother with autism and obsessive-compulsive disorder. When I asked her how this affects their home life, she used the example of family dinners, where her brother will choose to sit close by but in another room, finding the eye contact over meal times very stressful. It actually sounds weird when I say it, she said, laughing, but it's just normal for us, it's just dinner time. And he'll shout his conversation over to us from the other room and we'll shout back. In the same way that all families had their habits and quirks, Rufus has shaped ours. We cannot watch a game of rugby without him performing the haka in front of the TV alongside the All Blacks. At dinner, especially if we have guests, Rufus will always make a speech, usually saying the things we all feel but wouldn't bother to say ourselves. It's so good we're all here together. I'm happy to be with you all. Rufus loves us in a way that's completely uncalculated. When friends ask me what it's like to have a brother with Downs, I can feel him beside me. His worried expression when I'm upset, his face peering around my door in the morning, bringing me tea or toast, his fast jokes, his teasing, his pulling up the loose strap of my dress or tucking my hair behind my ear. Hey, my gorgeous, beautiful sister, he'll say when I answer the phone. What's up? How's Wellington? Don't tell me you're walking. He finds my walking hilarious. When he came to visit me one weekend, he couldn't stop laughing as we set off down the road on foot, waving his phone at me and suggesting we get an Uber like real people. What's that thing I have? He'll ask sometimes. Down syndrome? He rolls his eyes and sighs. So annoying. Yeah, we say laughing, it is a bit. Sometimes he'll get frustrated. He knows there are things he can't do, things he's missing out on. He wants a girlfriend, he wants to drive a car. But I wouldn't say he ever feels sorry for himself. It's not his way to agonize over things, to reflect, to worry about himself in relation to others. We love that about him, his reliable contentedness, his wholehearted joy in himself and his life. I love my legs, he once said to me, proudly admiring them sprawled out in front of him as we watched TV, undeniably short and slightly stumpy. Me too, I said, looking at my own legs and thinking about all the times I've wished they were longer, slimmer, somehow better looking. I love my legs too. If I could go back to the hospital room when my parents were meeting Rufus for the first time, when they were terrified, I would go back and say thank you. Thank you for, without even meaning to, gifting me this person that taught me things my other siblings just couldn't. I don't want to give you guys like a cheesy takeaway, but I can tell you with total honesty that it terrifies me that there are countries in the world where no sibling is gifted that experience. This is not a conversation about abortion. It's a conversation about the kinds of diversity that we value. And maybe it's a wake-up call to look critically at the road that we're heading down, where responsibility of care may fall that much more heavily on the people that choose to make their lives harder. I think as technology gets more and more advanced and that power to choose gets more and more available, I think it's just really important that we just take a step back, pause, and just ask ourselves, like, what do we actually value? What matters to us? You know, and who gets to come with us? And who might we leave behind? I don't want us to feel less comfortable, less familiar with disability. You know, I actually want the opposite. I want more diversity, more complexity, more difference. You know, I think my parents didn't have an example of Down syndrome to look to when Rufus was before Rufus was born, you know, and I think had they found out his diagnosis much earlier, I don't know what they would have done. And so with that in mind, it is on me to share my experience and to talk loudly about the things that he's given me to make him as visible as I possibly can. Kia ora, thank you, ka kite anō.